February 17th, 1962, Toronto, Ontario. In the hospital, the doctor, in the usual way, tells my unwed mother, "It's a girl." 56 years later, I bear both the psychological scars of the effects of the branding of me as a girl and eventual woman, and the wrenching separation from my birth mother. In the story I tell about myself, I am unable to separate the sex assignment imposed on me from the sexism and misogyny that were my due as a girl, or from the gender policing and homo-hatred I received for not being very good at it. Nor, for that matter, can I untangle the privilege of my whiteness and relative wealth from the patriarchal burden of shame imposed on unwed mothers and their offspring, and my own bad luck in the adoption game. Being called a boy or a girl and assigned correspondingly gendered names and pronouns are two of the many dimensions of power that adults exercise over children and that shape how they experience the world. I have been traveling in ethnographically rich circles, both socially and as a researcher, offline and online, formal and informal, with transgender kids and their families for over 7 years. This theme drives the book: how to decenter my own whiteness, class privilege, and professional status to present a more nuanced analysis of transgender kids in Canada and the United States. When I first interviewed her at age 7, right after she had switched her pronoun, she told me, "I was born a boy, but I like being a girl." Finn is another trans kid who saw no future for himself. In the course of my research, I learned, via his mother's heartbreaking announcement in an online parent group, that Finn had committed suicide at the age of 14. Later that night, while I slept in the next room, he quietly left the house and walked to the railroad a few blocks away and lay his body across the track. It was the 11 o'clock train. I shared these thoughts with his mother, and she agreed, saying, "I was struck by that mere determination and courage it must have taken to stay on those rails as the train roared towards him." His mom described Finn as gifted and wise, but lacking the maturity to manage his considerable emotional sensitivity. She explained, "He had to lay down that load he was carrying somehow. The hopelessness he felt in the road ahead of him is what broke him that night. But even if he had no problem getting Lupron, he still had his internal demons. But," she said, "if the barriers to taking Lupron were not there, I don't think he would have died that night." But I think it's very important to transition the school away from sex categories and teach kids good bathroom etiquette. Start in kindergarten. Like, everybody uses the bathroom. This is how you behave in bathrooms, because I don't think bathrooms are safe. Sex-segregated bathrooms are safe places anyway. This idea that having a trans kid in there is going to put anyone at risk is ridiculous, because we know that, trans people of all ages are at great risk in bathrooms as opposed to, causing any kind of harm to others. But, why not start kids using, multi-stall, gender-neutral bathrooms and teaching appropriate etiquette about locker rooms and bathrooms. And, stop thinking about children in terms of girl and boy categories. Because then kids who are trans, who conform to a binary identity, are fine. Then kids who are cis, who conform to a binary identity, are fine. Trans kids who are non-binary are fine. And the kids who are trans but don't show themselves are also fine, and they're not experiencing trauma and crisis every time they face a bathroom door or every time they're, directed to a PE class that's just for one category or the other.
Excuse me. Are there any resources you could recommend for schools, teachers, administrators?
Sure. Gender Spectrum is an organization that's headquartered in Berkeley, and they have put together a document called the Gender Inclusive School. And I'm sure there are many others, but that's a really good one. I've read through it. Also in Canada, in the province of Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Ministry of Education put out a document about how to, address transgender kids in schools, which is, fairly progressive. But Gender Spectrum is ideal because it really emphasizes transitioning the school, not the children.
And a parent came up to me, and his child was, I don't want to say, was let's say skipping across. He was basically male at birth with a flower.
And, take him to drag shows so that he, sees, people like him and make friends with, like different kinds of men and different people and femmes who are all into femininity, parent activists, parents of trans kids who are activists, are more likely to be white and wealthy, because of the resources required. Also because they're not busy fighting against racism or colonialism or poverty, which, are very debilitating things. One of the things we know is that a very central aspect of colonialism was to impose a Eurocentric gender and sexuality system on Indigenous people with great violence. So one of the things that I really wanted to communicate in my book is if we really care about trans kids, we have to be looking at how white supremacy and colonialism and class inequality harms so many different kids. And if we're going to make things okay for trans kids, we have to make things okay for all kids. And, we have our work cut out for us.
And communities. And also I want to ask you, did I read correctly that you use the pronoun they and them?
Yes.
If you can tell us a little bit about how are you experiencing it and why did you choose to do it?
Well, I don't get mad when people use she, hers, because it's been used for me for so long, but I do prefer they, them, theirs. And I have in my office they, them, their, like I put it up. And because I don't want to be one of the people that misgenders people, but it's very hard to change. We're going to make mistakes. When I traveled by car from Canada to the US in 2016, a Euro-Canadian, visibly gender nonconforming, middle-class, designated female at birth, non-binary, trans-masculine person with my Black Canadian daughter in the car, I felt confident in my own power in the world. So confident that when I realized I had forgotten my passport, I didn't panic. I explained to my daughter that I was optimistic we would be let through, but I was careful to point out that this would be because of my whiteness and visible class privilege, and that, unjust as it is, it would be unsafe for her to approach the border with the same sense of entitlement when she is old enough to travel on her own. As I prepared to undertake a subsequent cross-border trip with my daughter in 2017, just after the election of Trump, I worried about my phone being searched, about my relationship with my daughter being questioned by border guards, about my gender issues. I was anxious about the trip and anxious about the future. Nothing untoward happened that day, but the experience of anxiety was significant in itself.